Meet Caesar. He's 45 years old, a senior director at an advertising agency, making fantastic money. If you logged into his brokerage account right now, you'd see a hard-earned balance of $800,000. By all traditional metrics, he is winning the game. But behind the screen, Caesar is completely burned out. He's grinding through 60-hour weeks, answering emails at midnight, and aggressively tracking every single penny that leaves his checking account. He is suffering from profound saving fatigue. Why? Because Caesar is secretly terrified. He looks at the rising cost of living, the looming threat of future taxes, and the sheer intimidating length of a 30-year retirement, and his brain tells him his wealth is dangerously fragile. He is convinced he has to keep shoveling cash into the furnace, relying on pure, just brute force willpower to reach a magical multi-million-dollar milestone before he can finally exhale. His financial discipline hasn't bought him freedom. It has become a psychological prison. Then, there's the exact opposite story. Let's call her Elena. She hit $600,000 in her portfolio at age 42. And then, she did the absolute unthinkable. She just stopped. She turned off her 401k auto deposits entirely, walked away from a high-stress corporate grind, and took a massive pay cut to do work she actually loves, making just $40,000 a year. Her coworkers whispered that she was throwing her future away. Her family thought she had lost her mind. But Elena wasn't having a breakdown. She had simply crossed an invisible line. She realized her money was now working significantly harder than she ever could. So why is Caesar sitting on $200,000 more in the bank, working himself into an early grave while Elena sleeps perfectly through the night? The difference isn't work ethic, and it isn't reckless optimism. It's a missing variable. Caesar is looking at raw, static numbers. He is terrified of the invisible enemies of wealth, inflation quietly eating his purchasing power and taxes shrinking his eventual withdrawals. But he doesn't understand how critical mass actually works. He doesn't realize that once your portfolio reaches a certain mathematical velocity, compounding doesn't just slowly grow your balance. It aggressively outpaces inflation and swallows the tax burden whole. Caesar is grinding unnecessarily because he hasn't mathematically proven to his own anxious brain that he no longer needs to. Most people are trapped in Caesar's endless sprint. They never learn how to transition from building wealth to actually trusting it. Today, I'm going to show you the exact moment your retirement becomes inevitable. We will calculate your exact walk-away number, fully budgeting for taxes and inflation. And I will show you exactly how to mentally survive a market crash without panicking and going back to your cubicle. Think of your journey to financial independence as a heavy wooden carriage that you have to drag to the peak of a jagged mountain. In the beginning, there is only one engine pulling that carriage, you. More specifically, your willpower. Every dollar you manually shovel into your 401k, your IRA, or your brokerage account is you digging your boots into the dirt and pulling. Early on, you are the wealth. Without your discipline, without your paycheck, without you sacrificing dinners out or skipping vacations, the carriage simply doesn't move. But here's the brutal reality that keeps people like Caesar awake at night. The mountain is actively rigged against you. There are two invisible forces bleeding your momentum dry. First, there is inflation. Inflation doesn't just slow you down. It physically alters the mountain, making the incline steeper with every passing year. What cost $1 yesterday costs $1.10 tomorrow. Second, there are taxes. A mandatory toll booth waiting for you at the summit, demanding a cut of everything you dragged up there. If you rely solely on your willpower engine, inflation and taxes will break your back before you ever reach the top. You cannot outgrind them. You need the second engine, the machine. Compound interest. And to actually beat the rigged mountain, we have to look at your money through the lens of real returns. We don't use a rosy, optimistic 8% or 10% stock market average to make ourselves feel better. That's a trap. Instead, we use a conservative 5% real return. We take that 8% historical market average, aggressively strip away 3% to account for inflation, and build our math entirely on the 5% that survives. So, let's look at the exact moment the power shifts. Let's assume you are a strong saver, contributing $20,000 a year to your portfolio. When you have $100,000 invested, that 5% real return generates $5,000. It's cute, but it's a pony. Your $20,000 manual contribution is still doing 80% of the heavy lifting. You are still the workhorse. When you grind your way to $300,000 invested, the math begins to shift. 5% generates $15,000 organically. Suddenly, you and the machine are sharing the load almost evenly. You can feel the carriage getting lighter. But then, you hit $500,000. At a 5% real return, your portfolio generates $25,000 completely on its own. Your $20,000 manual contribution, the money you bled for, the willpower you exhausted, is no longer the main character. It has been dethroned. The machine is now pulling $25,000 of weight, outpacing your human effort entirely. And remember, that is after inflation has already taken its bite. This is the crossover point. It is the exact mathematical moment your portfolio outworks your willpower. You aren't dragging the carriage anymore. You're just jogging alongside it, watching the machine pull it up the mountain. So the psychological high of hitting the crossover point is intoxicating. You can physically feel the carriage getting lighter. But it is vital to understand that the crossover point is merely a shift in momentum. It is not the actual finish line. Coast FI is the finish line. It is the exact mathematical dollar amount you need in your account right now so that you can drop the rope, walk away, and never invest another dime for the rest of your life. But here is where most online calculators completely fail you and why people like Caesar stay trapped in their anxiety. They calculate their finish line based on what they want to spend, completely forgetting that the IRS is waiting at the summit. If you want to spend $70,000 a year in retirement, you cannot just generate $70,000. You have to budget for the tax man. Let's assume your money is sitting in a standard 401k or traditional IRA, and you will face a conservative 15% effective tax rate in retirement. To actually take home that $70,000 to live your life, your portfolio needs to generate roughly $82,350. That is your true gross requirement. Now, let's subtract the money you don't have to manually pull from your investments. If you expect a conservative $25,000 a year from Social Security, you subtract that from the $82,350. The gap left over is $57,350. That is the exact amount your investments must produce every single year. To find your total target portfolio, we use the 4% rule. You divide $57,350 by 0.04. The math gives you a final, tax-adjusted finish line of $1.43 million. That is the summit of your mountain. Now for the magic trick. How much do you need today to guarantee you hit that $1.43 million without ever saving another dollar? To find your personal coast number, you reverse engineer the target using the compound growth formula over the time you have left. Here is the exact formula to calculate your escape route. Coast number equals 1 plus expected real return, years to retirement. Target portfolio. Let's say you are 35 years old today, and you plan to permanently hang up your boots at age 65. That gives the machine 30 years to work. Remember our 5% real return from the last chapter, which already destroyed the invisible enemy of inflation? You plug that in. You take your $1.43 million target and you divide it by 1.05 to the 30th power. The answer is roughly $330,000. Let that sink in. If you are 35 years old and you have $330,000 invested right now, your retirement is fully funded for your desired lifestyle with taxes and inflation already paid for. The machine is strong enough to carry the carriage the rest of the way. You have mathematically won the game. Let's picture the exact scenario that terrifies every single person who finally pulls the plug. You do the math. You realize your portfolio has crossed the threshold. You are Elena. You walk into your boss's office hand in your resignation, and take that low-stress, $40,000 a year dream job. For 6 months, you sleep like a baby. And then the nightmare happens. The market crashes. You wake up one morning, check your phone, and see that a sudden recession has wiped 20% off the stock market. Your beautiful, hard-earned $600,000 portfolio is suddenly sitting at $480,000 in a matter of weeks, and $120,000 has simply vanished into thin air. This is the crucible. This is the exact moment where the math collides with human psychology, and where most people completely break. Your brain doesn't process that 20% drop as a temporary, abstract fluctuation. It processes it as an active physical threat to your survival. In behavioral psychology, this is known as loss aversion. The psychological pain of losing $100,000 is literally twice as intense as the joy of gaining $100,000. Your willpower engine, which you finally managed to turn off, violently roars back to life. Panic sets in. It screams at you that you made a catastrophic mistake, that you are going to be destitute, and that you need to immediately beg for your corporate job back so you can start hoarding cash again. But here's the absolute truth that loss aversion tries to hide from you. The math already knew this was going to happen. Remember that conservative 5% real return we used to calculate your coast number earlier? That 5% is not a straight, smooth line up the mountain. It is a messy, volatile average. And explicitly baked into that average are the devastating 20% crashes, the global recessions, and the agonizing bear markets. Coast FI is a decades-long game. It is not a year-to-year measurement. The machine is built to absorb the shock as long as you don't panic and dismantle it. So, how do you actually survive a bad year without retreating to the cubicle? You build a psychological fortress using 3 absolute rules. First, you stop checking the account. Watching a portfolio bleed daily does not change the market. It only feeds your anxiety. Delete the brokerage app from your phone. Second, you build a concrete wall between your investments and your daily life. Before you ever transition to a Coast FI lifestyle, you must have a 6 to 12-month cash emergency fund sitting in a boring savings account. The golden rule of a market crash is that you never, ever sell assets at a loss to pay for groceries. Your cash buffer guarantees you can ride out the storm without touching the machine. Third, you remember your baseline. Coast F. That means you still have to cover your current living expenses with your lower-paying job. When the market drops, you tighten your daily budget. You lean on your cash if necessary, and you leave the investments alone. You survive the bad year by stubbornly trusting the math you did in the good years. Let's go back to Caesar for a moment. Imagine Caesar finally does the math. He realizes he has hit his tax-adjusted coast number. Does he quit his high-stress tech job? Does he walk away? Usually, the answer is no. Instead, Caesar suffers from a psychological condition I call the willpower hangover. You cannot spend a decade of your life aggressively optimizing your budget, tracking every penny and depriving yourself of comfort, and then simply flip a switch to turn that anxiety off. The willpower engine gets permanently stuck in the on position. Caesar looks at his spreadsheet and thinks, the math says I'm done. But what if I work just one more year? Just to build a safety buffer. Just in case. It sounds incredibly responsible, but it is the ultimate trap. That one extra year quietly turns into 5. Shown during those 5 years of unnecessary grinding, Caesar gets a massive bonus. He tells himself he deserves a reward for his hard work, so he buys a much bigger house. Then, he finances a luxury car to sit in the new driveway. Suddenly, his baseline spending expectations inflate. And because his lifestyle costs more, his future tax burden rises right alongside it. His original $1.43 million finish line? It just moved to $2.5 million. Caesar's coast number has evaporated. He has successfully trapped himself in a shiny, expensive cage built entirely of his own success. He is right back on the treadmill, running from the invisible enemies of inflation and taxes all over again. How do you avoid becoming Caesar? How do you actually accept the freedom you sacrifice so much to build? You need a concrete, three-part framework to design your life. Now, first, calculate your tax-adjusted coast number annually. Not obsessively every single week, and definitely not every time the market dips, but once a year. Check the math to know exactly where you stand. You need to know if you are waking up and going to work out of mathematical necessity or out of pure, unexamined habit. Second, you must forcefully decouple your identity from your income. This is the hardest psychological shift you will ever make. Hitting Coast F. That means your financial outcome is secure, but it doesn't change who you are. If the machine is now doing the heavy lifting, your identity has to evolve beyond simply being the grinder. Third, start designing your life in chapters. Pre-coast is for building the machine. Post-coast is for deciding what the machine is actually for. Do you want to reclaim your time to be with your kids? Do you want to take massive career risks? Start a business? Paint? There is no wrong answer. But if you don't choose deliberately, inertia will choose for you. And inertia always chooses more grinding. The dirty secret of the financial world is that most ultra-wealthy people hit their coast number decades ago. They kept going not because they needed the money, but because they had absolutely no idea who they were without the grind. Knowing when you have mathematically won the game is the ultimate financial edge. Find your number, figure out what your machine is for, and finally give yourself permission to stop playing the game. If this shift in perspective helped you today, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs permission to finally exhale.